To most, he would seem to be a fairly regular guy. A little rough around the edges, perhaps, but with a good job, a comfortable home, and a loving wife and family, he appears to have led a normal life. There is a saying about judging a book by its cover. Start turning the pages and you will soon find Scott Casey has written a remarkable story in his 44 years. It is a story filled with sacrifice and service, heartbreak and horror, and a story that could have ended abruptly many times. In 1986, Casey was fresh out of high school when he enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces. His career eventually took him to Germany, where his team was designed to be a quick reaction force for NATO, with an eye toward the Soviet Union. In 1992, that unit did react quickly, but not toward Moscow. Casey was one of the first UN peacekeepers to be deployed into Yugoslavia, a nation exploding into all-out civil war.
We were an advance party, so there was only 12 of us from November Company, and we had to patrol our entire sector, which was pretty much 300 kilometers square, and that's looking for anything and everything.
Years of non-combat training had prepared Casey for the physical demands of being thrown into the middle of a war zone, but nothing could prepare him mentally and emotionally for the violence that resulted from this intense ethnic hatred. This chapter of Casey's life is as gruesome as any horror novel, but it's not fiction. It's real. Like the time early in his deployment that Casey crept around the corner to the backyard of a Serb home, only to find 6 dead bodies strewn about the backyard.
Disgusted that people could do this to one another, and of course, that's all, there's a lot of emotions going on at the same time. There's, you're trying to stay sharp because you don't know if there's still a threat in the area. And of course, there's your humanity, the humanity within you is just, it's shocked. There's just no other way to put it.
There's the time he and one other soldier made their way through a Serb monastery that had been ransacked and desecrated, and the grim discovery he made when he opened the door to the priest's study.
The first thing that hit me was the smell, and it was vile. It was the most putrid thing I've ever smelled in my life. And there, hanging from the chandelier, which was not very ornate, it was just a wooden chandelier, was one of the priests. And he'd been beaten and tortured and left to hang there. And I puked. I threw up right there. I just couldn't hold it back.
Perhaps the most scarring moment came one day as he sat trapped in a gunner's turret, watching helplessly through a scope as a little boy, his mother, and his sister were each killed one at a time by a gunman shooting from distance.
I was screaming at this point, for it to stop. And I was drawing a line from where they were to where I thought the shots were coming from, because I was going to obviously try and find the guy that was killing these civilians, and I was going to take him out. But I couldn't find him anywhere.
Casey refuses to call the shooter a sniper. Snipers live by a code. This man was a murderer. It was some time later that Casey found some measure of relief from the brutality he witnessed that day. He was invited to sit in with a pair of French snipers who were targeting the same type of indiscriminate killers responsible for murdering the mother and her 2 children. On this day, Casey wasn't so helpless. Receiving the rifle, he got one of the so-called murderers in his sight and squeezed the trigger.
It was a life-changing experience for me. I don't recall what caught my attention first, if it was the T-shirt that he was wearing, or if it was the recoil of the rifle, or if it was the smell of the cordite from the shot. I just know that he came into my sight doing his squat down, jump up, take the shot thing, and when he turned towards me, he was wearing a gray T-shirt, and on the front of it, this was brand new back then, it was an advertisement. It said, "Just do it," on the front. And that was it. The trigger squeezed, and yeah. There was a moment there when I felt that I had taken care of that woman and her 2 kids, finally.
The Yugoslavia chapter of Casey's life lasted 7 months. The conflict lasted a decade more, raising doubts about the success of Casey's mission.
It lasted 10 years. So to think that you actually accomplished anything, good at the beginning, no. I don't think it was a success because there wasn't a peace agreement in place in the first place. It wasn't meant to be initially.
There are many more stories in that chapter. Some are more uplifting, others just as grim and hopeless. But when the chapter ended, the shock of leaving a war zone was nearly as jarring as the shock of entering one.
We left Germany on a Friday night. We were petting the dog, kissing the wife, and playing with the kids. And on Saturday morning, we were up to our eyeballs in blood and guts and killing. And 7 months later, on Friday night, we were up to our eyeballs in blood and guts and killing. And Saturday morning, we were at home petting the dog, playing with the kids, and kissing the wife. And we were supposed to be normal. There was no normal after that. Life had changed completely for all of us. Everybody in November Company.
A soldier in a war zone is always on alert, ever aware that a threat could be targeting him. When Casey returned to Germany, and for many subsequent years, he could not turn that state of awareness off.
Little to no help for guys. There was no debriefings. There was no cooling off period. You were just told to suck it up and go about your business like normal. You were a soldier. Take it on the chin and get to work. There was a lot of guys that couldn't do that. It just didn't work that way.
Health professionals now call Casey's condition post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It is an illness that can often prove fatal.
It takes a lot of mental willpower to actually overcome PTSD, and not everybody can do it. From my tour alone, there's been a dozen guys that have committed suicide. There are probably, as many that are homeless. They've sought self-medicating, so they've either become alcoholics or drug abusers, and they're living on the streets.
It is sadly ironic that while Casey and his brothers in arms escaped Yugoslavia relatively unscathed, the greater threat has struck since they returned home.
When we got back to Canada, a dozen of the guys from November Company have committed suicide. 2 of them have been killed within weeks of getting back to Germany by drunk drivers. Multiple amounts of guys are, suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder and they're homeless. It's almost like we were safer in a war zone than we are here at home. This is a belt of ammunition that's wrapped around my arm, and each bullet that's in it represents one of my buddies that's been killed. And there's 46 here right now, and I'm adding a 47th because one of them just took his life 2 weeks ago.
It took a long time for Scott Casey to turn any pages on his experience in the place they call Yugo, but he is now making progress on his path to wellness. He no longer self-medicates or seeks days and weeks of solitude running from human contact. Much of his health today he credits to the woman he loves.
Nicely done.
Pretty overwhelming that he puts that much weight into me and his wellness, to be honest. I think he gets all the credit because the truth is he's an exceptionally strong individual with a high level of morality and consciousness.
This photograph I took from the back of an APC.
Another therapeutic avenue that has helped Casey exorcise the demons of Yugo is writing. Less than a year ago, as he was looking through the photographs he took in 1992, he began to write down the memories associated with those photos.
With each trip I made in Sector West, my personal look into Croatia was bombarded with new messages for my mind to catalog.
Before he knew it, he had 99,000 words, enough for an entire book. And as he seeks a publisher, it's not just the act of writing that will bring him satisfaction. He wants his words to be read.
There's things that are in this book that I've never told anybody, and it took me going over that, editing and grammar and all that, reading them over and over and over again to finally realize that, wow, I actually did something over there, and I actually did some good, and I don't have to deal with this anymore. It's out.
While books about the role of Canadian peacekeepers in Yugoslavia have been written by journalists and by high-ranking military officials, Casey believes his is the only volume to be written by a frontline soldier. According to Casey, his perspective is one Canadians need to see.
I want everybody to know the truth about what we endured there. Because as a general rule, Canadians have a warm, fuzzy feeling of what peacekeeping is, and this was nothing like that.
Exposing the truth is his target now. He has long since put away the weapons of war. Whether his book will be picked up by a publisher is a story for another chapter. Yet the simple fact that Scott Casey is writing new chapters in the book of his life is implausible enough.